Welcome to Second Take, the show that focuses on the issues behind the news. The Industrial Development Corporation was seen as a key component in South Africa's efforts to stimulate itself out of the recession. Engineering News editor Terence Creamer joins me in studio to discuss whether it was successful in playing that role and what the future holds for this important development finance institution. Terence, welcome to Second Take. Much was made about the role of the IDC in providing support to distressed companies, but how did it actually perform last year?
Well, we all got together, or the government, business and labour got together early last year as the recession was biting to try and find a framework to respond. And the IDC was seen as the key conduit to helping distressed companies that were really vulnerable to the fall-off in demand and prices. And 6.1 billion was set aside almost immediately to try and help those companies in distress. This week we heard that during that year, 1.4 billion rand was actually dispersed to 28 companies in distress, which saved 8,800 jobs, which is good. But in the context of that framework agreement, I think we must really say what stimulus. What stimulus really emerged from government. Eskom totally underspent against its budget. Transnet totally underspent against its budget. I'm sure as we look at the departments that spend on infrastructure, we're going to see more and more those capital programs were cut back last year. There was no stimulus from Eskom. There was no stimulus in the infrastructure environment. In fact, it was a totally pro-cyclical response from government departments. And again, I think we can say a fairly pro-cyclical response from the IDC. Yes, they did set aside 6.1 billion. Yes, they did have the balance sheet to support that. But they said disappointed. There was a lack of demand for that product. And there was a lack of demand generally last year. Where we saw their approvals during a year that they were supposed to stimulate the economy. Their approvals went down to 9.4 billion rand from over 10 billion rand the year before. So the DFIs, and we saw the same with the DBSA, the state-owned enterprises, government departments, really, I think, failed to play that stimulus role. And we saw it in the figures in the end, 1 million jobs that were lost.
The IDC says it will now inject 100 billion rand into the economy over the next 5 years. Does it have the capacity to do so, and how will it fund it?
Well, that's a good point. I think that, yes, IDC's really come down in terms of its debt. I think it was a debt-equity ratio of 38% a few years ago. It's now sitting at 4%. So very, very modest debt on its balance sheet. So there is a lot of capacity or headroom to rise on the debt-raising side. And they are talking about a 40 billion debt-raising plan over the next 5 years. That's very significant for the IDC. They haven't really been in the debt capital markets for a number of years. They have listed a domestic medium-term note program of 15 billion, and that they'll start drawing on over the next three years. And they're also talking about a global note program, but they say that's very preliminary discussions. As well as being a DFI, they're able to access concessionary finance from other development finance institutions, such as the African Development Bank and others. So I think that there is capacity to raise more debt. And I think what we have to see on the other side is there really demand again? Is there project origination? Is there entrepreneurial endeavour? In fact, Jeffrey Quena mentioned yesterday he thinks the lack of entrepreneurial endeavour in South Africa is one of the reasons why their approvals fell, their commitments fell, as well as the fact that distressed companies actually didn't come through and tap into the 6.1 billion rand. So we're going to have to see more project origination. So to meet that 100 billion rand target, which is up from the 70 billion target for up till 2013, so this will go till 2015, it's going to require a different approach, I think, from the IDC and from others about looking at project origination, looking at where the opportunities are, and really starting to put some genuine efforts behind new projects.
More and more comparisons are being drawn between the IDC and Brazil's BNDES. What do you make of this?
Well, I think it's a logical conclusion to draw, because people are saying we need a developmental state, we need more capacity from the state to sort of scale up this economy, scale up manufacturing, scale up infrastructure. And BNDES has got a very interesting record in this regard. I mean, last year it dispersed $70 billion into that Brazilian economy and into the South American economy, versus, what we're seeing the IDC in the sort of 9 sort of 9 billion rand range. So it's a very different scale. It's a huge bank, and it has a huge impact in that region. So people are saying, can't we do something similar? But I think there are very marked differences between an IDC and a BNDES. The one is that BNDES gets a continual flow of capital through through the wage bill. A certain percentage comes in, and that gives it an immediate capital base to play with. That the IDC, has to go to the debt capital markets or possibly to the shareholder for a recapitalisation plan. So they've got this continual flow in, and it's significant money, especially as more and more people become part of the formal economy, and more people in Brazil are employed in jobs where they can draw on that wage bill. So that's the one big difference. The other thing is there's a market failure in Brazil around long-term finance, which our financial markets don't really have that same market failure as acutely. Yes, cost of capital is also high here, but actually BNDES is the only game in town from what I can see in that long-term capital market or long-term debt market. So that, again, I think there's a marked difference, and whether the IDC is going to then crowd out private sector banks and to play that role might be sort of counterproductive in South Africa. The other thing is that BNDES covers both infrastructure and the industrial markets. So basically we need to have a merger probably between DBSA and IDC, which cover those two separate markets, to create a super DFR, and then look at a recapitalisation plan and continual flows into that bank to really provide the continual fresh capital. In addition, during the recession, Brazil didn't fall into recession, but during that recessionary period, Brazil pumped in additional money into BNDES, $100 billion over 2 years, and they spent. I mean, they really upscaled during that downturn, and as I said, they distributed $70 billion during that recessionary period, which saw them actually create jobs and continue to grow during that period. As I said earlier, we didn't see any of a similar type scale of stimulus from our government. And in fact, we actually were pro-cyclical, not counter-cyclical. So we're a long way off from that.
Terence, thank you very much. That is the Second Take show for this week. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time for more news analysis.